Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Lion update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season is in full swing, and we're deep into the NBA and NHL finals. BetOnline has more ways to stay in the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. We keep the dog days of summer rolling with the largest selection of odds on everything, with updated odds on Major League Baseball, UFC, and boxing to tennis and NFL futures. BetOnline remains the best online source for all your sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. Penn State fans, are you feeling confident that the Nittany Lions can win college football's national championship next season? Lock in your futures bet at betonline.ag today. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin, flying solo today. Earlier on this afternoon, Penn State head football coach James Franklin held a press conference, and there are plenty of headlines that have come out of it in regard to the roster, who's available, who's not available for Penn State football in the short term, in the long term, as well as some other comments on what Penn State's roster is going to look like in 2025, confidence in certain positions, certain players, and then also James Franklin's overall comments about the state of college football, the power that individual conferences have. So a lot of different things that James Franklin got into this afternoon to address, but I want to start off with a key injury that's been reported. Redshirt freshman defensive end Max Granville has suffered a long-term injury and is considered out for the foreseeable future, according to James Franklin. Granville was injured at home during break while he was working out and training. So this is a big blow for Penn State football in that I don't believe that Max Granville was expected to be the primary starter at defensive end opposite Denai Dennis-Sutton. However, it did seem like there was an expectation that you would have Denai Dennis-Sutton and then a combination probably of a rotation between the young Max Granville and the seasoned veteran of Zariah Fisher. Now, Zariah Fisher, who's been around the program for a long time, has had a lot of issues with injuries, and as James Franklin articulated in his press conferences, dealt with adversity in football and in his personal life. So it just hasn't quite materialized with Fisher. So while there is internal excitement about Zariah Fisher and what he can be, according to James Franklin, having Max Granville there as that rotational guy at defensive end was certainly giving a lot more confidence, I think, to this Penn State football team. This program is considering what the defensive end spot could be. And again, this is a defensive end room that is coming off of losing Abdul Carter, a huge presence at defensive end. You had those bookend DNs with Denai Dennis-Sutton, Abdul Carter. So that pass rush, that solidarity, I guess, or that confidence more so at defensive end, it's a little bit shaken by this. So James Franklin addressed this quite a bit, said that his heart breaks for the kid and the family. Not what we wanted or needed either. A guy who played last year, and we were depending on taking that next step this year. To hear James Franklin use the word depending on, the phrase depending on, is a big deal. And that is not something you often hear attached to such a young player. And remember, it was Max Granville who reclassified so that he could join the Penn State football program earlier, obviously able to play in 2024 as opposed to joining in the class of 2025, something fellow defensive end Daniel Jennings has done, in that he was supposed to be a class of 2026 guy and is reclassified to the class of 2025. So that's something James Franklin also went into depth about in terms of Daniel Jennings. A lot of excitement, a lot of promise for a guy who's already about 250 pounds, but apparently his high school coach had left the program. So seemed like Jennings and his family and his team felt like he'd done everything in high school that he had done and was looking to move forward to the college ranks and joining Penn State. So James Franklin went into more depth in regards to the rest of the defensive end room, saying, between Nittany, Fisher, Jalen Harvey, Mason Robinson, Malachi Williams, Anai White, the transfer from Texas A&M, who a lot of people got excited about in the winter cycle, I believe, when he transferred. So still a very raw prospect, had some production at Texas A&M in 2023, but had some injury issues and didn't see much of the field in 2024. Kamaju, Burnett, some other names that were thrown out there. So there's going to be a lot more competition in that room, according to James Franklin. But he said, quote, now we have to try and speed up the maturation process with the other guys. So this was something that, Justin King and I have talked about a lot on this show, is that it's not going to look the same in terms of the production at defensive end as it did last year. And how could it? Abdul Carter going number 3 overall to the New York Giants. You knew there was going to be a void. You knew it was going to look different, but this is definitely a hit to what the potential of that defensive end spot opposite DDS could look like. So now it does create something consistently that we have to pay attention to through the summer into training camp. The positive things about Zariah Fisher that James Franklin brought up, and I know a lot of Penn State fans are concerned about Fisher because a lot of injury problems, has struggled to stay on the field. Franklin said, quote, internally, there's a lot of confidence that Fish has a chance to have a big year. He's one of those guys I don't think anybody's talking about outside of the program, but there's a lot of excitement internally. He's an older, more mature guy. He's had some adversity, as I talked about earlier on. Franklin would go on to say, I think he has a chance of a really big year. He's big, long, athletic, a skinny, 260 pounds, long arms. We feel good about Nittany and Fish as 2 veteran guys, and I think Fish is going to surprise some people. Franklin's saying, I think there's going to be some significant buzz about him next year, about midway through the season. And I think this is interesting, and I'm not even remotely going to try to compare Zariah Fisher to Abdul Carter, but we've seen how Deion Barnes has done such a good job with this defensive line, the defensive end specifically. It wasn't until October of last year that the switch went off, the whatever it was, that switch was flipped in the head of Abdul Carter, making that transition from linebacker to defensive end. There were plenty of people talking about in September of last year, it's like, well, why did we do this? It doesn't look like it's working. And then all of a sudden by October, the light bulb went off. And I'm not saying it's going to be something similar, but we did just get done seeing this with somebody who was playing their first year as a defensive end starter at this level of football. So this would be the first year for Zariah Fisher being the guy. And now with Granville going down, I don't know if it's so much as Zariah Fisher is the unquestioned number 1 guy opposite Nittany Dennis Sutton. It's probably leaning that way. And it's going to be just open for all these other guys to try and step up and try and take advantage of an opportunity. So defensive end is something we're going to have to pay attention to. And we were already paying attention to that, frankly, because of the absence of Abdul Carter. So now this just illuminates this situation. And we certainly hope Max Granville is able to get back soon. Other parts of the defense that people are paying attention to, because how could you not after the blue-white game? James Franklin said to the media, hey, if you're a linebacker and you're looking for an opportunity and you want to come play for linebacker U, this is your time to step up. So the question was put out there, why'd you put out that call? And James Franklin was pretty straightforward without mentioning Tamir Robinson, former Penn State linebacker, who's now transferred to USC. It was Franklin who said, quote, I hated to lose the player we lost in Robinson. Guys that come in with injuries. Again, Tamir Robinson came to Penn State from high school with injuries. Franklin said, it throws off the timeline in their head and frustration can set in some ways unrealistically. Once that happens, a departure in the transfer portal, then the program has to move on. We've tried a few times with guys who are highly regarded but haven't proven it at the college level. I'm kind of out of that business. If you're going into the portal, you have to be going for production, not projection. That was music to my ears because I think we've seen plenty of times where Penn State has tried at a number of different positions to get guys that either project at a certain level, potentially from high school, or project from a lower level of college football to a higher level. And hey, this is going to work out. And listen, the jury is still out on Devontae Ross at wide receiver, going from the Sun Belt and Troy now to Penn State in the Big Ten. But at least it sounds like early on that's gone well. But how many different opportunities have we seen for players? And Julian Fleming, and I understand this is a difficult time for him off the field, and our heart breaks for him. At the same time, that was something where that was evaluating the player based on a high school evaluation and then the place that he had been at Ohio State, and seeing like, okay, the production hadn't been there at the college level. So that was a projection. And now this is James Franklin and the entirety of the program adjusting course. And the reason that we talk about projection versus production is because that was a big reason why Amari Campbell transferred to Penn State from UNC. So there's a lot of things to take away from this, and that it sounds like reading between the lines that Tamir Robinson likely in his head thought he should have potentially been seeing more playing time, potentially been starting. And again, this is just me speculating, no inside information, but reading between the lines, the exact quote from Franklin, guys that come in with injuries, it throws off the timeline in their head and frustration can set in some ways unrealistically. So what that tells me is that coming into this offseason, where we knew with Jim Knowles, this was going to be a 4-2-5 defense with 2 starting linebackers, 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 defensive backs. Everybody and their brother knew those 2 linebackers were going to be Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca. Tamir Robinson, however, many expected to be that number 3 linebacker. It wasn't a situation where Robinson was never going to see the field. Penn State often goes into a base 4-3 alignment, 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers. So he was going to play, but potentially there was a situation where Tamir Robinson was frustrated by that. And again, a guy recovering from injuries and the light bulb just going off, playing linebacker at the college level being very different than what he'd done at the high school level. So it sounds like potentially Robinson got frustrated that the timeline wasn't there for him to be starting this season and look for an opportunity elsewhere. So that's me speculating and reading between the lines here with James Franklin, but it does sound like that's pretty close to what happened. In regards to Amari Campbell, the transfer from UNC, James Franklin talked about that recruitment process. Again, looking at Campbell's production last year, very high production at UNC. And it was Franklin who said, I look to people that I trust. Notably, the aforementioned Tony Rojas was very vocal on social media, trying to get Amari Campbell to come to Penn State, and obviously spoke up within the program. Former UNC head coach, former national championship winning coach at Texas, Mac Brown, obviously speaking very highly of Amari Campbell, plus Jeff Collins. All names like that vouched for Amari Campbell. So, I mean, those are some strong people to write you a letter of recommendation. And early on, James Franklin said, based on first impressions, Campbell's been good. So I am personally thrilled to hear this adjustment in terms of the evaluation of your existing roster and understanding, hey, Robinson potentially was frustrated with the situation coming from high school and trying to get to the college level, get healthy, get acclimated, get on the field, all those sorts of things, and maybe just wasn't willing to be patient this year and wanted to get on the field and start this coming year. Fittingly, he's off to USC within the Big Ten, playing for Danton Lynn, former Penn Stater defensive coordinator at USC. And then that line about, I'm out of the business. What was the line? We've tried a few times with guys who are highly regarded but haven't proven it at the college level. I'm kind of out of that business. If you're going into the portal, you have to be going for production, not projection. So I am personally thrilled to hear that, because Penn State has had that issue a number of times, and they seem to have turned the page in that respect. Speaking of production, that's exactly what James Franklin said he saw from wide receiver Trebor Pena, the transfer from Syracuse, who ESPN is lauding as potentially the #1 top acquisition in the transfer portal in the spring cycle going into this season. #1 most impactful acquisition, whatever it is you want to call it, a new player or something like that. I don't even know if that would be considering a freshman necessarily, but ESPN, a lot of media outlets have been speaking very highly of Trebor Pena. Franklin, talking about Pena, said right away you see the production, and production matters. Also, he's a 6th-year guy. A championship formula comes from also being a mature team. I'm also glad that all of the stuff that was put out publicly about how and why his transfer took place, the financial descriptions of how it played out, none of it was true, at least from our experience. They were non-factors. So to dive into this one, Syracuse head coach Fran Brown had spoken out publicly after Trebor Pena jumped in the transfer portal and alluded to the possibility that Pena had requested $2 million in compensation through NIL for this upcoming season. The possibility that Pena was nervous about how the offense was going to work this year now that Kyle McCord had gone off to the National Football League. McCord, former Ohio State quarterback, done extremely well with Pena last year in more of an air raid system. Pena had a phenomenal season. So Pena was worried about the existing crop of quarterbacks, and this was before Notre Dame quarterback Steve Angeli transferred to Syracuse. Pena was already out at that point. So some things have changed there, but still there was the possibility that the allegation was that Pena wanted $2 million in compensation. Fran Brown publicly saying that's for the big homie at Ohio State, meaning Jeremiah Smith, who we all know certainly worth that type of money. And it sounds like the way that James Franklin phrased this, that none of it was true, at least from our experience. So that was not Franklin saying, hey, what Fran Brown said was not true. He went into detail saying just from our one-to-one experience with Pena, those were non-factors. So it tells me a handful of things. One, there's the possibility that Pena had representation that put a number like $2 million out there. And it was possibility in my mind that if Pena was to come back next season to Syracuse, and it sounded like wanted to stay at Syracuse, his concerns were that his production was going to drop off, his value could drop off. So he wanted to maximize his earning potential while he was there. So maybe that was a Hail Mary attempt by Pena and his camp to try and get a sizable dollar amount back this upcoming season, if there were going to be questions about that. It also tells you that once the possibility of even sniffing that dollar amount went away, then Pena started talking to other schools. And I remember Pena was speaking to Miami, spoke to Penn State. I believe there was one other ACC school. The name of it escapes me at this point in time, but still there were other programs that it sounded like Pena was talking to. And when it gets down to that point where you've put that out into the universe, that you asked for this astronomical amount of money, and now you're going into your last year of eligibility, and the important thing is for you to, one, attempt to keep that level of production up, and two, vie for a national championship. Well, your dollar amount's going to inevitably have to come down. So I can understand that in those conversations with Penn State, Pena and his camp potentially, and again, this is just me speculating, that Pena and his camp would have walked some of those things back because they're looking for the right fit now, and the dollar amount is not as important. So to the point that James Franklin said, that the stuff out there, the financial descriptions being non-factors, it's very likely that that was thrown out there, but who knows when Pena was still looking to stay at Syracuse. But then when you're having conversations with these bigger programs and you're looking for that one last opportunity, you have to make some compromises. You have to sacrifice a little bit. So it sounds like at least that's been a good situation at this point in time. Some other roster-related things, James Franklin saying that tight end Andrew Rappleyea, linebacker Tony Rojas, and right tackle Anthony Donko, quote, we expect all three to be cleared not just for camp, but for the majority of the summer. So that is very encouraging. Anthony Donko being able to get back There's that continued conversation about what's going to go down at right guard. Sal Wormley off to the National Football League. Nolan Rucci slid in and played very well at right tackle when Anthony Donko went down last year after the Minnesota game. So there's been a lot of questions of, okay, who's potentially going to be that right guard? Is it going to be Cooper Cousins, the highly touted interior offensive lineman who was a freshman last season and saw a lot of playing time last year? Is it a situation where Rucci starts at right tackle and Donko bumps inside, or vice versa? A lot of questions there. Getting Rojas back, you feel very good about that, especially now that you have Dom DeLuca and Amari Campbell from UNC there as those, top 3 linebackers you potentially have. And then Andrew Rappleyea. This is an interesting one in that, Rappleyea potentially had the highest ceiling of any tight end that came in last year's class and helped even more so than Luke Reynolds, but he got injured early on in the 2024 season. Rappleyea looked good in the blue-white game, but clearly was still learning the offense. I think there's a possibility, and I've said this a number of times about this tight end room going into 2025, is that with Luke Reynolds, who looked like a excellent receiving target and has a lot of potential in that respect, Khalil Dinkins, who can get it done in the passing game, but is certainly an outstanding blocker. And now you get Rappleyea back. There's lots of talent in that tight end room, but this feels strikingly similar to the point in time when Penn State had Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson, and Tyler Warren. And it was that 3-headed monster at tight end, and all of them progressing at their individual clip. At one point, it was Brenton Strange, who was kind of the old man in the clubhouse, but was still the more seasoned of the guys and more talented at the time, went off to the National Football League. Okay, next man up. Theo Johnson was a little bit ahead of where Tyler Warren was at that point in time in terms of maturation and overall ability. Theo Johnson, boom, off to the National Football League. And then we all know what happened with Tyler Warren last year. You saw Luke Reynolds competing and performing well behind Tyler Warren. But, when a tight end has over 1,000 yards receiving, over 100 catches, it's tough to be the number 2 tight end. Khalil Dinkins kind of got caught in that. And I think there's a lot of people that looked at Dinkins as, hey, is he just a blocking tight end? And he really can do more. But now that you get Rappleyea back, and hopefully he can stay healthy for a long period of time, there's the possibility Penn State has that steady progress of a 3-headed monster at tight end. That, are you going to realize it this season? No, but slowly as the years go by, Rappleyea and Reynolds are going to have their opportunities. Dinkins, very curious to see what he does this year. Who the primary tight end is, I think it'll be a toss-up between Dinkins and Reynolds. I personally feel like Reynolds is going to be the number 1 receiving tight end, but do they trust Dinkins out on the field more in more packages? That's certainly going to be a question. And then to wrap this up, James Franklin spoke a lot about the future of college football, and there's been a lot of discussions about every individual team or conference who should have the biggest say in the future of this sport. And there's also been the conversation about, in terms of the SEC and the Big Ten, getting the argument for more automatic qualifiers, for instance, in the college football playoff. And James Franklin said that's because of the discrepancies or things that aren't even in the sport. Some conferences play 9 games. Some conferences play a conference championship game. Some teams are not in a conference. Little reference there to Notre Dame. It makes things really difficult. Franklin went on to say every conference and every AD would have the same vote. Well, we have more teams in our conference in the Big Ten and a greater level of competition. So why should it be balanced? I think that's the discussion everyone's having. To me, the most important thing is all the commissioners getting together and saying everybody is going to have the same rules. Franklin went on to say, how do you choose the best 16 if you're trying to project who they are? Illinois, as James Franklin brought up, perfect example of this, perfect victim of this. Finished with a 9-3 record, as did Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Alabama. So you have this logjam of 4 teams that are left on the outside looking in at the college football playoff last year. But based on projections, everybody was, crying foul about what Alabama could have been last year, but nobody was really entering last year talking about, wow, Illinois could be a college football playoff team. And you needed to give the opportunity for these teams to show what they are on the field. So Franklin went on to say our conferences are built differently across college football. Everybody shouldn't get the same vote. Let's spend as much time as we can to make it consistent across the board. And I am all for that, trying to make it uniform so that there's consistent ways for all these different conferences and teams to be judged so that it's not the deserving versus best subjective argument, which infuriates so many people and really has the human error element in it. Franklin also went on to talk about college football being transformational versus transactional. And that's something that he's talked about in the past, but I love the way that he put it here. He said, quote, I think the majority of college football coaches got into this to be transformational within young people's lives. None of us, my age or older, said Franklin, got into this because of money. It's because you love the game and you want to help young people. I think that has changed. People are attracted to the game for the wrong reasons. And now there are young people and families making transactional decisions as opposed to a transformational opportunity. We're one of the few programs that is still focused on being transformational. We are fighting to balance those two things. There's an aspect you have to embrace, but you don't have to abort what your values are. I think there's a way to blend both. There's a lot to unpack here. And I think, yes, I've always appreciated that Penn State has attempted to be a transformational program, a developmental program, not a program that is going to just go into the transfer portal and throw crazy money at a guy and see if it works. And we saw the downfall of that at Florida State, for instance, last season. The element about, nobody my age or older got into this because of money, I disagree with that. I think everybody's after a career ultimately, and you want to be able to provide the best possible circumstance you can for your family. And, college football is a lucrative business. So I understand that, but it is a newer phenomenon now with the way that NIL and transfer portal changes have altered the game, is that, people in the sport, on coaching staffs, on recruiting staffs, et cetera, and then people even around the sport operating the NIL space, agents, et cetera. People are vulturing the sport at this point in time and are trying to make it transactional. So to find the balance between all these things, again, we're still waiting on the House settlement to be figured out so that there's some guidelines, some rules. And this is what everybody's been asking for, is just give us some guidelines, give us some rules, have everybody playing by the same rules so we can all try and put the best thing on the field. It is something that Penn State has embraced, and I think I've been encouraged that Penn State has not aborted their values the way that James Franklin put it, and that Penn State very much still looks like the program that we know and love, based in its tradition, based on fit, wanting to develop people, not just for playing on the football field at Beaver Stadium, but for what they can do later on in life. And that's something, talking to Justin King, a number of Letterman people who've been around the program for years, is that it's remained consistent. But you have to blend both. You have to be able to sit there and realize you have to pay these guys so that they'll stay. And you have to focus on that roster retention, and you can't just pitch them on the university and pride, tradition, legacy, all those sorts of things. You have to give them the total package. So it sounds like Penn State is caught up in that department, but I think there's a lot of elements about that transformational versus transactional program and feeling in college football that we're still all grappling with. I think the people within the sport that are making decisions, and the players, coaches, et cetera, are feeling it firsthand, of course. But all of us as fans, it hurts us seeing that the sport has become so transactional. And I think that was one of the reasons why we all became fans in the first place, because it felt like this point of pride, a community feeling. It felt like you could see players transform over time, and coaches transform over time, and programs transform over time. And now it just feels like there are often instances where it's just, whoever can write the biggest check is going to have a seat at the table. So it's a challenge, but I was interested to hear what Franklin had to say on this. I'm interested to hear what all of you think about everything that Franklin addressed in his press conference. He certainly got into a lot in about a half an hour span here on a Thursday in June. So quiet time of the year. But what do you guys think about Max Granville going down, being out for the foreseeable future? How do you feel about the praise that was given to Zariah Fisher, praise given to Amari Campbell, Trebor Pena as well? What do you think about his recruitment process, the $2 million number? And how do you feel about what Franklin was saying in terms of the fairness of which conferences and teams should have a say and should not have a say, and also transactional versus transformational. So a lot that the head coach of Penn State football, James Franklin, put out there this Thursday for all of us to dissect. So we'll keep an eye on how all of this develops, especially with the roster in the coming months. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.